Hi everyone, welcome to Pro Wrestling Defined. I'm Jonathan O'Dwyer and I have an awesome guest on the show today. I'm so excited to have him on. He's the author of the book, The Masked Saint, and the movie, The Masked Saint, is based on his incredible life, his incredible story. He was a wrestler spanning 10 years. He was in a lot of the top territories back in the day, from Florida to world-class championship wrestling with the Von Erichs, even wrestled the Undertaker at one point, which we'll talk about later on. He's had an amazing life and career, and it's an absolute honor to have you on. Chris Whaley, how are you doing today, sir?
Man, if I was any better, I would have to wipe some of it off.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome. How's everything in Florida now at the moment?
Things are well. We have a holiday called Thanksgiving,
Yeah.
and it's today after tomorrow. So everybody's getting ready for Thanksgiving, and it's a great holiday. We have a great time. You eat a lot of turkey, you get to see a lot of family, and so we're really looking forward to it.
Excellent, excellent. Well, we'll get to the book and the movie later on, but I wanted to start at the beginning. I understand you were a big fan of wrestling as a child. I understand you actually had polio as a child, and watching wrestling in the hospital was a big thing in getting you through that tough time. Talk a bit about that, about your fandom as a child and overcoming polio.
Yeah. Well, actually, from the time I was in the second grade, I got sick in the second grade. I had pneumonia. I was in the hospital, and then in the third grade, I had pneumonia. I was back in the hospital. In the fourth grade, I got really sick, and they found out that I had not only polio, but I had something called viral encephalitis, and at the same time, I had fallen at school. I was so weak, and I fell into a pole. And so I was in the hospital. I had polio, viral encephalitis, and a brain concussion. And
Wow.
so I was in the hospital for 3 months. And this was back in, like 1963. And in those days, I know the younger people don't understand this, but in those days we had 3 channels on TV. And, if the president was on, you didn't get to watch your program because he was on all 3 channels. Today you have 600 channels or whatever. But you get your days and your nights mixed up a lot because of sleeping and all. So when you're up late at night, and I turned the TV on because I was bored, and professional wrestling was on, and I loved it. I watched it every opportunity that I got as a child, and then when I could get my dad to take me over to the next city, they had wrestling on Saturday nights at the arena in the next city. So my dad would take me over there, and that was just, oh man, I was in hog heaven, getting to see the guys that I saw on TV, and so I just loved it. And I didn't get to play sports like I wanted to when I was a kid because I was so sick. And so when I got out of the hospital, and then in the fifth grade I had pneumonia, the sixth grade I had pneumonia. Finally, the doctor sent me to another doctor to find out if I had any allergies, and then they found out I was allergic to everything, and that's why my immune system was so low. Yeah. And so I started taking the allergy medication, and suddenly I started putting on weight. And I had a great doctor, a godly man, and he's the one that got me going to the gym. And so I started going to the gym, started doing all these things, and my body changed, and I started getting in some good shape. And then my wife and I were in college together. Matter of fact, we graduated from college together, and we came back to my hometown. And one day I was looking at the newspaper, and it said wanted professional wrestlers. And I showed it to my wife. My wife was a high school math teacher, and so she was grading papers. And I walked over and showed the paper to her, and she just kind of rolled her eyes and said, Okay, and so I drove over to Tampa and walked in, and there was one of the bad guys when I was growing up. He wrestled as the Great Malenko,
Mm-hmm.
Boris Malenko,
Boris Malenko, yeah.
and he had two boys that I got to work with. Jody, he was actually a better wrestler than Dean.
Wow.
Dean got more notoriety. You know, he was in the WWE and he wrestled as the man of 1,000 holds.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, it was just the beginning of a dream come true, and I never stopped loving it.
That's awesome. And just talk about your actual training for wrestling, because the climate of wrestling was so different back then, and like the training was supposed to be very tough because they were kind of trying to filter out people that they didn't trust, because the workmanship of the business was a lot more guarded back then. So
Right.
talk about your training under Boris Malenko.
Yeah. Uh, he was as good of a trainer as he was a wrestler.
Wow.
He wanted to make sure that you knew what you were doing when you got in the ring. He wanted to make sure you could protect yourself because some of the guys you work against take advantage of you. You're giving them your body, and yet they take advantage of you to make themselves look good. So he was really good about that. But the business was highly protected in those days. You just you didn't you didn't tell people, you didn't everything was kayfabe.
Yeah.
And
It's a pity there's not more of that now.
yeah, and the office over in Tampa was run by Eddie Graham, and Eddie had a sign in the sportatorium that said if you wanted to try out for wrestling, to see him or see him there at the sportatorium. And what he would do is he would put you in the ring against Bob Roop. Bob Roop was he was a collegiate All-American wrestler, and he wrestled in the Olympics. And he was Bad News Bear, and they'd get in the ring with Bob, and Bob would break their arm or break their leg, and so they would go back and tell all their friends. So nobody wanted to try out.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they really protected the business in that day, which they don't do today.
Exactly. And so you move on and talk about some of the territories you went through. I understand you went through Florida. Was that for Eddie Graham's Florida Championship Wrestling?
Yeah. Well, no, it was pretty much toned down whenever I was in there, and they were in a little bit of disarray. I worked with a lot of those guys in different shows in Florida, and then I got to work on a lot of shows in Florida. And then we left in 1985 and moved to Texas. And I was going to seminary in Fort Worth, Texas. And so I got to wrestle in WCCW. And they also had Ken Mantell started up a territory called Wild West Wrestling. And so I got to work in Wild West Wrestling and WCCW, and got to work with some great guys there.
Talk about WCCW. That was the Von Erichs territory. Talk about did you have much interaction with the Von Erichs, with Fritz and the boys?
Yeah. Well, sadly, right before my wife and I moved to Texas, right before David Von Erich died in Japan.
Oh, yes.
And then, they had another younger brother that died, I guess, when he was 9 years old. He was struck by lightning. So when I got to Texas, there was Kevin and Kerry and Michael. And then Michael had surgery on his shoulder and developed toxic shock syndrome, and he never got over it. And Michael took his own life. And so it was just Kerry and Kevin. They had a younger brother, Chris. Chris eventually took his own life. Kerry took his own life, and there's only one left, and that's Kevin, which was very sad. But they were, they were revered in
Yeah.
Texas. I mean, they were as big as the Dallas Cowboys.
Hmm.
They really were. People just loved the Von Erichs, and it was, it was always an honor to work for Fritz there, and to work in the Sportatorium, and got to work with some, big names there. Bruiser Brody,
Oh, wow.
yeah, flamboyant Eric Embry, the road. I mean uh, the what's his name? Warrior.
Oh, the Ultimate Warrior. He was Dingo Warrior at the time.
Yeah, Ultimate Warrior. Yeah,
Yeah.
and some other great names. I wrestled Iceman King Parson. Got to wrestle the Freebirds.
Wow.
Freebirds, Michael P.S. Hayes and Buddy Roberts and Terry Gordy.
That must have been quite an experience at the time, I'd say. Was it the Freebirds?
Oh yeah. Michael was he was a big name and a great worker. Buddy Roberts was a great worker. He was a lot of fun. He really was. He's kind of crazy. When you got in the
Yeah.
ring, you knew it was going to be a lot of fun when you got in there with him. Yeah.
Definitely. And just the name you mentioned there a while ago, actually, the Ultimate Warrior. What was he like at that time?
He was pretty stiff. He was pretty stiff. When I worked against him, we got in the ring and he backed me over in the corner and he hit me so hard I couldn't. I mean, it staggered me, and we locked up again. And I said, "Hey, man, you're pretty stiff with that punch." And he was, he's not even talking. So he backs me over in the corner and he hits me again. And there's an old saying in the business: one time is a mistake, two times demands a response. So if you don't do that, they'll just continue to take advantage of you. So
For sure.
So next time we locked up, I backed him and I hit him as hard as I could. I mean, I hit him as hard as I could. Didn't even stun him. He just kind of stood there, and well, anyway, we finished the match and I went back to the dressing room. I pointed my chair towards the door and I was looking for something to hit him with because I know he was going to, try to kill me. So I found a steel bar and I had it right by my chair. And when he walked in and he's looking, he saw me and he came over and I grabbed the bar and he came over and he stuck his hand out and he said, "I got a little stiff with that punch, partner. Sorry about that." And I went, "No problem, no problem, no problem." Yeah. But some guys you didn't do that with. Bruiser Brody. I probably got one of my last concussions. When he kicked you in the head, he kicked you in the head.
Ooh, yeah.
So I got, probably one of my last concussions I got from him. And then I got a concussion from Iceman, King Parsons too, on a suplex. He really, on the mat. That was pretty hard. So, but hey, that's part of it. Right?
Yeah, it's part of the deal, I suppose. But talk about some of your other favorite guys to work with throughout your career.
Working with the Undertaker was a really, really big thrill. He was when I worked against him, he's like 23 years old.
Yeah.
And it was my last year in the business, 1988. And he's 6'8" and he weighed 315 pounds. So he makes you look a little small when you're in there with him, but great, had a great match. And there's a story in my book about that. In those days, my wife and girls, sometimes they would go to the matches. I have two daughters, and so on that particular night, I worked against somebody else, and I was getting ready to, get cleaned up and go out and meet my girls at the car. and the promoter came in and said that the guy that was going to work against Mark didn't show up, so he needed somebody to work against Mark. And I raised my hand. I said, I'll do it. So I had to let my girls know that I wasn't leaving. And then when I got into they didn't know who I was working against. So when I got into the ring and the lights went down and he walked in, both my little girls were crying. And my wife was looking around real frantically and grabbed her purse and started going through her purse. And anyway, the match started, and we had a great match. And we were driving back to Fort Worth that night, and I asked my wife, I said, what was you, right before the match started, what were you doing going through your purse? And she thought for a minute. She said, oh, I was looking for the checkbook to make sure you paid the insurance.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Yeah, I suppose with somebody as imposing as him, you want to have things covered.
Yeah. Well, he's 6'8" and his arms are that long, and he did a full body press. So I was a long ways up there, and then
Wow.
he just, you fall all the way down, boom, and hit the mat. And you think the ring's going to fall apart when you fall that far. It was good.
And the rings back then were a lot harder then as well. So
Yes,
that's
they were
another thing.
Yeah, a lot harder. A good ring, they would put 2x6s long way, about 18 inches apart. And then they would put 1-inch plywood down. And then they would put carpet padding and then a canvas and tighten it down. And that was the ring.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember there was one guy, he had 2x8s that he put, and he ran the 2x8s, and it was like working on concrete. It was really, really rough. But yeah. I've been body slammed on concrete, and getting body slammed in that ring was about the same thing.
Wow.
Yeah.
Dang.
Yeah.
What's interesting as well about your story is the fact that like you had a 10-year run as a wrestler, but you were actually working as a youth pastor at the time as well, weren't you? And you actually had to hide the fact that you were wrestling.
Yeah, that was early on before we left Florida to go to Texas.
Okay.
Yeah, my wife was pregnant with our first child, and I was a youth minister, and they didn't pay youth ministers very much, And then my wife at this time was not able to go back to school, so she was not getting paid, and we needed every cent we could get. And I asked the pastor about me wrestling, and he went, no, we're not going to turn this church into a circus. And so, and I, at that time, I was working without a mask, and I was just using my own name. But I was home on a Saturday, and I was watching the matches on TV, and one of my buddies that worked with a hood, a mask, and that's when it hit me. I said I could do that, nobody would know. So I got a white mask, and I had white trunks and white boots and a white cape, and I started wrestling as the Saint. And so, I could work, and people at church didn't know about it. Of course, I would come into the church. I have a black eye or a broke nose, or my shoulder hurt or whatever, and they'd say, what happened to you? And I said, I fell down, and that was the truth. I fell down. I had a lot of help falling down, but nobody knew, so that was good. It worked out well. Not doing that.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. So, why did you eventually end up moving away from wrestling? Was it injuries, or were you just moving on to full-time ministry, or what was the story there?
Yeah. I graduated from seminary in May of 1988. And so we left Texas, came to Florida, and then I started pastoring a church, which is depicted in the movie West Side Baptist Church. So I went from that wrestling to being a full-time pastor, which is what my calling is and what I've been doing for the last 30 years. Yeah. So it was a little bit different than professional wrestling, being in there.
Yeah. Yeah.
But,
You're not taking a bunch of slams and getting the body abused, but I think it's probably more mentally taxing than what wrestling probably is.
being a pastor is the most stressful thing I've ever done in my life.
Yeah, I can imagine.
I mean, getting into the ring with 300-pound men is nothing compared to some of the things that you deal with in the ministry, and it's just a stressful life. But when I became a pastor, and you have things that you're supposed to handle as a pastor, and I still had that professional wrestling in me. A woman who was being abused by her husband, and she was a sweet gal. She would come into the church and she'd drop her kids off, and she was always the last one in and the first one out. And one particular Sunday, when she came in, she was wearing sunglasses, which is a little unusual. And after the service was over, she was the last one out, and she took me by the hand, and she had tears coming down. She was, when I raised the glasses, she was sporting a black eye, and bullies infuriate me.
Yeah.
A bully is someone who picks on someone because he knows he can beat them. That's a bully. Yeah. So usually bullies don't, get reconciled with like they should.
Yeah.
So I told her, I'm gonna go see your husband, and she got, upset. No, he'll hurt you. And I was like, I'm not worried about that. So anyway, I went to see him as a pastor, but ended up as a wrestler.
And the problem was solved anyway, wasn't it? He didn't do that to her again.
But I had one thing after another that happened like that, and that's what gave me the idea of writing The Masked Saint.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I wrote the book, and then to have somebody want to make it into a movie, that was incredible. So, they made it into a movie, and it's a crazy life going from wrestling to being a Baptist minister. And I did get to wrestle about 3 more times after I became a pastor. I did some benefits.
Oh, okay.
I had a lady in my church who was dying of cancer, and we did a benefit to raise money for her, and had some great names. Dory Funk Jr. I don't know. Are you familiar with that name?
Oh yeah. From the Funk family, Terry and all. Yeah.
Yeah, Dory Funk was. He and his wife came to the church that I pastored, and so I had Dory Funk Jr. I had Nikita Koloff. I had the Warlord.
Oh.
I had Bugsy McGraw. I had Dick Slater. I had some great names that just called them and said, "Hey, would you work for your travel?" And they all said yeah, and so they came, and we put on a great show. And I did that about 3 times, and it was really a thrill, to get back into the ring after being out of the ring so long. So, But those days are over. I'm an old man now. I can't do that.
I'm a young man and I still wouldn't be able to do it. So, but just on speaking on your faith journey there, talk about when I know your family had background. Your mother was a Jehovah's Witness, and then she became more evangelical. Talk about when your faith kind of became crystallized for you yourself, where you got to the point where you felt this is true and I'm going to live my life for God.
Right. Well, I'll tell you the story on that. My mom was raised as a Jehovah's Witness, and my dad wasn't anything. He was a long distance truck driver and a fifth degree redneck, you know. So they got married and they moved to Florida because my dad worked for the trucking industry in Central Florida. And so he was a long distance driver and he's gone. And one day a pastor knocked on our door and my mom answered, and he told her, he said, "I'm a local pastor." Well, when she was growing up, she had a lot of questions about Jehovah's Witness movement. And she would ask questions, and her dad would not let her ask questions. He'd say, "That's not for you to know." And so when the pastor knocked on the door, she said, "You know, I've been praying for someone like you for a long time." And so the pastor came in and they sat, and before he left, my mom prayed and asked Christ to come into her heart. And she was the beginning of the spiritual heritage of our family. I had to go to church, but I really wasn't that crazy about it. And I kept going to church. And then when I was 16, I saw a young lady in church who came with her sister. Her sister was singing that morning. And so she and her other sister came to hear their other sister sing. And I was awestruck when I saw her. And we eventually got together, and we were boyfriend and girlfriend. And she knew exactly what she wanted to do. She wanted to be a high school math teacher. She grew up very poor and did not want to live in poverty. And she knew the way out was to have an education. I had never planned to go to college. My dad did not have an education. My mom did not have an education. It was not stressed in my household. And so, you know, I just wanted to get out of high school and start working somewhere. Mm. But I fell in love with her. And I followed her down to a Christian college. And that's where I came to know the Lord. Under the ministry of a great pastor by the name of Dr. Jess Moody. He was the pastor of the First Baptist Church of West Palm Beach. And I had never heard the gospel preached like he preached it. Because when he preached, I could understand. He made it come alive for me. And so in September of 1973 is when I got down on my knees in my dormitory room. And I prayed and asked Christ to come into my heart, and my life has not been the same since, you know. And it was shortly after that I felt the call into the ministry also. So God is good. I tell people every good thing that happened to me because of God and my wife, because you know. If she hadn't come into my life, I may not even be alive. But she just made a big difference in my life, and still does. We've been married 45 years.
Wow.
So, and we have two wonderful, godly daughters, and they're married to godly young men, and we have 6 grandchildren. So I am just very blessed, and very thankful for everything that God has done for me. And also, you know, another thing is because of the wrestling and because of the book and the movie, it gives me unbelievable opportunities like this one. I am talking to a young man in Ireland What would have given me that opportunity had I not been in professional wrestling and got to do all of those things? So I'm just very blessed, very blessed.
Yeah, he definitely laid out an incredible path for you. So that's amazing.
Yeah.
Just going backwards a little bit, actually, while you were working as the youth pastor earlier on in your career, was that well known actually in the wrestling side of things, and how was that kind of received in the locker room, backstage at the time?
In my early days, there were not a lot of Christians in wrestling. I didn't even know any when I was first started out. They were, they were not the kind of guys that you wanted to go out and hang around with after the matches.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I knew where they were going.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to go to those places. So it was later. I mean, now I think there's more Christians in wrestling now than I can ever remember. One of my closest friends is a guy by the name of Mark Mero.
Oh yeah.
Mark wrestled as Johnny B. Bad.
Johnny B. Bad, yeah.
Yeah, he was the WCW World Television Champion.
Mm-hmm.
He was the WWE Intercontinental.
Intercontinental, yeah.
And Mark he's a great Christian guy. And I tell him every time I get together, I say, Mark, I've never met anybody in the business like you, because he lives it. He lives it in his life. He's a great, great guy. And a guy that I got into wrestling with. He wasn't a believer then, but he is now. His real name is Mike McClaskey. He wrestled as the evil Prince of Naka.
Okay.
But he's a great guy, and we keep in touch. He's living in North Carolina now, but you just didn't, you didn't have a lot of guys who were Christians or who respected Christianity. I can take it if you don't want the Christian life, if you don't agree with the Christian life, that's fine. But at least give me as much respect as I give you. And you didn't get that, when I was in wrestling. You didn't get that. And even the Von Erichs, they were portrayed one way, but they didn't live that.
Yeah.
They didn't live the life that they talked about. So that was very sad.
And that's kind of what led to the demise of that family, really, isn't it? That kind of double life, wasn't it?
Yeah, I don't know. They were always nice and good to me. So I mean, I'm not saying anything derogatory about them, but just as far as the Christian faith, they didn't live it. When I was there. So maybe I don't know. I haven't talked to him since 1988. So maybe he's changed. That would be a good thing if he has.
Yeah, he seems to be doing well. There was a big documentary about him there recently called Dark Side of the Ring, and he was featured in it, talking about everything.
I saw
he seems to be he seems to be doing very well.
Yeah. So they show the Dark Side of the Ring over there, huh?
Oh yeah. We have Vice TV over here as well. On it's Sky TV over here. That's our cable, the version of cable over here, I guess.
Yeah. Last year, my wife and I went to the Hall of Fame induction in Wichita Falls, Texas, and Abdullah the Butcher.
Oh, wow.
Got inducted, and so I got to talk to him about the Bruiser Brody thing and all. So that was really interesting. Got to see Ronnie Garvin, Hands of Stone. Ronnie Garvin was there, and Bob Roop was there. He got inducted, and so there's I don't think you can go to any day of the week and turn the TV on and not see wrestling.
Yeah.
It's that big. You know, they got this new thing. I think it's called AWE, and I think
AEW, yeah.
AEW, and of course you still got the WWE, and I think there's a NXT or something like that. And then
Yeah.
you know, there's some independent shows across the country too. So it's a lot different than it was when I was in it. A lot different.
Kind of the fundamentals of it kind of seem to be creeping back now. There's some wrestlers that are really good at making it believable and you know, bringing that realism back into it again. Like Roman Reigns is very good, and Walter, he's another one to look out for. Very old school in their style. So I have a bit of hope that is starting to make a comeback rather than this kind of, you know, high spot kind of stuff, like, you know.
Yeah, I get a little sick of that. Just high spot. They just don't know the fundamentals anymore. You know, one of my friends was Blackjack Mulligan.
Yeah.
And you know, Blackjack, even though he was a huge man, you know, Blackjack still works. You know, he still did the holes. He still did everything that way. Bob Orton Jr., you know, he was I tell people, I say, I can tell you how old I am. I wrestled Randy Orton's dad, you know, so that's how old I am.
He was fantastic, though. God, he was such a talent. And Randy, actually, his son, is probably the best guy that's there today. He's really followed in his footsteps in terms of the style he has. Very realistic style.
Yeah.
But back on your story. So when that incident, we'll say, happened, where you had the woman in your church that was being abused by her husband, and some of the other things like that, where you kind of had to, I know you don't like the term vigilante, but where you had to show kind of form initiative, we'll say. Talk about kind of the struggle of that bit, being a Christian and being in these kind of situations that kind of demanded a really firm response that maybe some people mightn't, you know, necessarily associate with Christian response, we'll say.
Yeah, that's a great question, by the way. I'll never forget whenever the Masked Saint came out. I had a missionary in China, Macau, China, that read my book, and he sent me an email. And the email, he was just really lambasting me, saying, you know, how a Christian should not do what I did, and a Christian does not use force, and all this kind of stuff. And I responded to him in a nice way, but I asked him, you know, what Bible was he reading? You know, because did he read about David killing Goliath? You know,
Yeah.
Not David and his armies annihilating, you know, several times God said, go in and wipe them out. Ultimately, go in and do that, you know. You know, there is such a thing as righteous indignation, because that's what Jesus did, you know. Righteous indignation is to be mad about the things that make God mad. And of course, when he saw what they were doing to the temple, he turned over the money changers, and he got a whip and he cleaned house, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I think, you know, there's a line in the book that Miss Edna used. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. And you know, I just believe that there are some people who will not respond in any other way other than force. You know, you can talk to them till you're blue in the face, and it's not going to change them, and they're going to continue going in the direction they are. But I just think that sometimes somebody's got to stand up to those people.
Yeah.
You know, somebody's got to stand up to, because they're all bullies. All of them. They're all bullies. And somebody's got to stand up to it. And I did it. Yeah, there's a struggle, you know. One of the last incidents that I had was actually in the church parking lot. I was the pastor of this church, and I had to go to the hospital and make a visit. And I walked out of the church, and I heard somebody dropping the F-bomb in the parking lot. You know what the F-bomb is, right?
Oh yeah.
Well, that'll get your attention in a church parking lot.
I can imagine.
So I'm looking around, and I see this guy. Every other word coming out of his mouth is the F-bomb, and he's got a pregnant girlfriend, and he hit her in the parking lot. He hit her, and I screamed across the parking lot. I screamed and said, "Hey!" And then he, you know, started coming towards me, and he was screaming and using all kinds of filthy language and challenging me. And I just started walking towards him. You know, I took my coat off, I took my tie off, I took my glasses off, and I was walking towards him, and I didn't even realize I was doing what I was doing. And then, you know, when I got to him, I said, "Hey, you know, you're in a church parking lot. You shouldn't be using that kind of language, and you certainly shouldn't be hitting this young lady who's pregnant." And then he came towards me and he said, "It's none of your effing business." And I hit him, you know, and we physically fought in the parking lot. And I ended up picking him up and body slamming him on the concrete. And I knelt down and put my knee in his throat, and I said, "I'm going to let you up, and I don't want to ever see you, you know, here again. And you certainly better not ever hit this young lady." And you know, I let him up, and it was like it was over, and I didn't even realize what I had done until it was over. So I think sometimes your emotions just get so much to you when you've seen evil for so long and you just can't stand it, and somebody's got to do something. So, but yeah, I did struggle with some of those things. I really did.
Wow. But it's better to have that assertiveness to make wrongs right rather than being passive. And
Yeah.
I just think there's a bit too much of that sometimes in the Christian circle, kind of just expecting everything to kind of, you know, magically, you know, be made right without being assertive. But
Yeah.
so talk about the process of writing your book, and then moving on to the movie.
Yeah. I never looked at myself as an author. Really didn't. I thought that was something, you know, other people did. And so for several years, I tried to find someone that I could tell the story to and they would write it. And it just never worked. And then one Saturday, I was sitting at the computer and I just started writing, and I printed it out. It was like the first chapter, and I gave it to my wife, and she looked at it and she read it and she said, "Hey, that's good. Keep going." So I just, you know, I kept going. Didn't know anything about the publishing business or anything. It was truly an adventure. That would take more than the time we have to tell you. But you know, the reason it was so easy to write is because each chapter is based upon something that actually happened to me. So I'm just telling the incident of what happened and putting it into words. And then, you know, when I got it finished, I actually sent it to a big publisher of Christian books called Tyndale. I sent it to Tyndale in Chicago. And I was so excited. I knew they were just waiting on this book, you know. And a week later, I got a box in the mail that looked like the box that I sent to them. And it had my manuscript in it, and it had a thing that said, thank you for considering Tyndale. However, we do not accept unsolicited manuscripts from unknown authors. Thank you very much, you know. And I was like, that was my first introduction. So, you know, I went into a Christian bookstore, and I just started getting books and writing down the name of the publishers, and I just started calling publishers and writing publishers, and nobody would talk to me. And so I ended up self-publishing the Masked Saint. Now, the thing was, when you're going to have a movie made off of your book, it's amazing the people that will talk to you then. So, so my book was republished with Morgan James out of New York, and they are a great publishing company. And so, matter of fact, they published my second book that's coming out the 1st of December.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So that was a great, you know, just a great fit with Morgan James. And the CEO of Morgan James is a great guy, and he gets to know the authors. And so that was great. And, you know, it gave me I've written a third book that we're still editing and changing. It's called Mr. President. It's about a professional wrestler there's a comedian and a professional wrestler. The comedian runs for president every 4 years, and he gets people to sign on to be his vice presidential candidate, and they don't know it. And so the world heavyweight wrestling champion signs on to be the vice presidential candidate, and they have a big to-do, and the Democrats have a scandal, and the Republicans have a scandal, and the comedian wins the presidency. And when he's doing his acceptance speech, he has a heart attack, and so that makes the professional wrestler the new president of the United States. And he puts his wrestling buddies in his cabinet. And it's a really good book. I can't wait to finish it and get it to the publisher.
Oh yeah, that sounds absolutely awesome. Talk about the one that you have coming out in December.
You know, I know I'm a professional wrestler and all, but I love Christmas.
Yeah, me too.
I had an idea for a Christmas story, and so this is it. It's Harold's Heavenly Christmas. And
that's awesome.
Yeah, this is advanced copies, and it comes out December the 1st. It's already. Do you have Kindle in Ireland? Kindle?
Yeah.
It's already on Kindle, but the book comes out December the 1st. And do you have Amazon?
Yeah.
You do?
Yeah, we have Amazon.
Yeah, it's on Amazon. Yeah, and
yeah, I'll put all the links for that in the description of this and everything as well. Oh, there we have the Masked Saint.
Yeah, that's the DVD, and then there's the book.
And they're all still available on Amazon as well. I checked earlier on before we came on. I've seen the movie. The movie is absolutely fantastic. Talk about that process. Roddy Piper was in that as well. I think that was his last actual movie that he was part of. Did you have any interaction with Roddy, and how kind of hands-on were you with how that story was told?
Yeah, it's kind of neat. I actually had the first movie producer talk to me. This guy was actually the producer of the first 3 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle movies that were blockbusters.
Wow.
He was the executive director of those 3 movies. And then he got into faith-based movies. He did a movie called Letters to God. And he lived here in Orlando. And so he got a copy of my book, and he asked me to come downtown Orlando, and I met with him. he actually kept me on the hook for about a year, and then ultimately just said, "Hey, I'm not interested anymore." And it was very disheartening. You know, you get this big build up and then the letdown. But I met a bunch of people in the business while we were going through that process. And one of them was a producer in Canada. And so he started talking to me, and we had our ups and downs too. And so one day I'm driving, and he calls me and he said, "Are you sitting down?" And I said, "Matter of fact, I am. I'm driving." And he said, "We're going to make the book into a movie." And I was dumbfounded. That was in February. They had planned to film it in July because they were going to film it in Canada. But at least if they filmed it in July, they could make it look like it was in Florida. But the script was not finished, and they didn't finish the script until October. So they started filming in November, and they filmed it in Sault Ste. Marie, Canada, and there was snow on the ground, and we don't have snow in Florida. So that's in the movie. They say it takes place in Michigan. I never pastored in Michigan, but they had to do that because of the snow on the ground.
Oh, okay.
But the whole process, they were telling me who they were getting to play the different parts. And when they told me that Roddy Piper was going to be the promoter, I was thrilled to death. He's a great actor. He probably did 80 films.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually worked against him 30 years ago, or 30 years before that. I had worked against him.
Oh, wow.
And so when I got there, I said, "You don't remember me?" "Oh yeah, man, I remember you." He was really good. If you go to YouTube, you can see his interview where he talked about me in the movie. He did some good interviews on that. But he was a great guy. He was a great wrestler. He's a great actor, and he was a great dad too. He loved his kids. And if you watch any of his matches, you'll notice that he has his wedding ring on. He never took his wedding ring off, even when he was wrestling. And it was so he looked great. That the movie was filmed in November, and then he passed away at the end of July in 2014, and we were just dumbfounded. Because he's the exact same age as I am. And
wow.
Yeah, he died in his sleep. So that was very sad. Very sad. But he was a great, great guy. Really was. He's crazy too. Crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, I met him once. He actually did a tour of Ireland here, doing an on-stage show and signing autographs and everything. So I met him actually just almost a year to the day before he died. So that was really cool. He was really an awesome guy.
Yeah. Had Diane Carroll was in the movie too. Diane Carroll was she was the first Black actress to have her own television show back in the 70s. Julia. And then she was in a movie, and she got nominated for an Academy Award. And she's a great singer. She's a great actress, and she played the part of Miss Edna in the movie. That was great. The little girl that plays our daughter, T.J. McGibbon, has gone on. She's done a lot of good stuff. She's just in a movie. Now, I don't like Robert De Niro. I think he's a pinko liberal.
Yeah, me too.
I don't like him, but TJ was in his latest movie called War with Grandpa. But she's in that movie. She was in Apocalypse, X-Men, Apocalypse. She was in that. So she's done a lot of good stuff. James Preston Rogers, who plays the Reaper in the movie. He was actually working for WWE, and he got so much business working as an actor, he quit wrestling, and he's a full-time actor now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but he's a great guy, man. He did a great job on there's a lot of movies that have wrestling in it, but I think The Masked Saint has the best wrestling of any movie. I think they did a
definitely.
They really did.
it was really well put together that way. Definitely, the most realistic for proper wrestling. I think definitely you're right there. Just on that note, kind of tying in with the name of the channel, what defines pro wrestling for you? So, what is the art of what pro wrestling should be in your eyes?
Um, I don't watch wrestling today. I just don't watch it because you know I was in a restaurant a couple of years ago, and I could hear the conversation at a table. There were all guys, and there was big guys there, and this one guy, and they were talking about wrestling and stuff. So after I got up and I was paying my bill, they came behind me, and I looked at him, big guy. I said, "So are you in wrestling?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, "I work for WWE." And I said, "Yeah. What do what's your name?" And Braun, is that it? Braun?
Yeah, Braun Strowman, I'd say, is
Yeah,
it?
Strong. Yeah. And that was him. And I didn't even know who he was, so because I don't watch it.
Yeah.
I'm not a Vince McMahon fan, so I think what he did to wrestling is not a good thing. Well, he certainly made wrestling a worldwide thing, but I just don't like a lot of things that he did, and so I just to me wrestling it was a tough thing when I was doing it. I mean, you earned your money when you got in the ring, and sometimes you didn't even know who you were working against, and some of those guys try to take advantage of you and stuff, and so you got to make sure you knew what you were doing to protect yourself and all. But in those days, I think it was good against evil, and good came out on top most of the time. They didn't have this dark stuff. They didn't have all the sexual innuendo with the women and wearing the things that they wear and all that. It was just it was something you didn't mind taking your kids to because
Yeah.
you had a good guy and a bad guy, and usually the good guy won. And then if he didn't win, he would win later.
Yeah.
Um, so that was good. And I think that's the way it is today. You have good against evil, and I believe that God causes all things to work together for good to those who love Him, to those who are called according to His purpose. So, anyway, uh, I hope this has been okay. I've taken up the whole hour here, and so I don't want to keep you longer than you're supposed to.
Oh, you're okay. There was just one last question I wanted to ask you on the Christian side of things. So I think this is a good way to end things. There's been a big rise in the nuns, as they say, in the last 30 years or so. People with no religious affiliation or no faith. What would you say to somebody that's a skeptic? That thinks that we're just wishful thinking or along those lines, that are struggling with that, or somebody that's interested, that's wondering but isn't really sure about the truth of the Christian faith. What would you say to a skeptic?
Well, there's one thing that is going to make a lot of determination in your life, and it's right here. It's your heart. When that heart stops beating, you're not going to be here physically, but spiritually, you're going to be somewhere. When I became a pastor, I had never done a funeral. So now, as a pastor, I am walking with people through death. And I can tell you there's a difference in the way a believer dies and a non-believer. There's a huge difference. And, I had this conversation with a guy. I was at a restaurant. We got into a conversation and he told me he didn't believe. And I said, if I die and everything that I say is not true, it's not going to be not going to make a difference, even though I know that that's not true. But if I died and what I believed in was not real, it's no big deal. And then I pointed to him. I said, but if you die and I'm right, it's not going to be good. And I said, I can tell you by the fact that the people that I have walked with through death, that there is a big difference in the way a person dies. You know, I'll never forget, the first one was a lady named Merle Tollison in my church. She was dying from cancer, and she was at the end. She was in a hospital bed in the living room, and she had not been awake for 4 days. And so I went over, her 3 daughters were there, and we got around the bed and we were going to pray. And all of a sudden, that little lady who had been comatose for 4 days, all of a sudden, she opened her eyes and she smiled. And she said, how beautiful, how beautiful. And one of the daughters said, what is it, Mom? Is it heaven? Is it heaven? She said, yes, how beautiful. And she closed her eyes and she died.
Wow.
I believe that God gave her a glimpse of glory before he took her. He showed her what she was coming to before he took her.
Yeah.
Now, on the other hand, this happened too at that church. I had a lady in my church who wanted me to talk to her husband, and he was a skeptic, and he didn't want to have anything to do with Christianity. And every time I went over there, he went the other way. He didn't want to talk to me. He was in the hospital dying, and his wife asked me if I would go and visit him, and I went to visit him. And he was near death, didn't want to have anything to do with it. And on the night that he died, he screamed. He screamed out, please don't let him get me. Please don't let him get me. This guy screamed at the top of his lungs, as if the demons of hell were coming to get him. And that man went out into eternity screaming at the top of his lungs. There's 2 comparisons there. One who knew the Lord, one who did not know the Lord. And there's a big difference. And so, you know, to any skeptic, you know, the Bible was written a long time ago by a lot of men. And, you know, if there were all kinds of errors in the Bible, you'd find all kinds of things to read about that, but there's not. You don't find that. You might have a lot of skeptics of the Bible, but they can't disprove it because we have the archaeological facts that prove the Word of God. But the biggest proof is the proof that I have in my own life, what a difference he's made in my life. And you can say that, what a difference he's made in your life.
Yeah.
And, you know, I wouldn't change for anything in the world. I wouldn't change it for anything in the world. And I would just challenge anybody that is a skeptic, get the Bible and start reading in John, the Gospel of John. Start with verse 1 and just read the Gospel of John. And I guarantee you, God can take that and he can change you and he can make you into a new vessel. One of my favorite Bible stories is found in Jeremiah 18, 1-6, where he told Jeremiah, the prophet, to go and he was going to teach him a great lesson from the potter. And he went, and the potter was working with a piece of clay on the wheel. And when he got through, it had flaws in it. And the potter took the clay and he squished it back together and he put that same piece of clay back on the wheel. And he made that same piece of clay into a new vessel. And then God said to Jeremiah, cannot I do the same with you as the potter has done with the clay? Or as the clay is in the hands of the potter, so are you in my hand, O house of Israel. And that was me. When God put me on the wheel, I was full of flaws. But God squished me back together, put me back on the wheel, and made me into a new vessel. Not a perfect one. I make a lot of mistakes. My wife's sitting over here. She can tell you all the mistakes. Yeah. You make a lot of mistakes. But in spite of that, God can work in spite of your mistakes, and he can change your life and make you into a new vessel. And I would encourage everybody listening to me to do that. And, you have my email address. If somebody wants to email me, I'll be glad to have a conversation with them, or like we're doing now, I'll be glad to have a conversation with them to talk to them about the Lord. You have that open invitation.
Excellent, and I'll include that in the description of this video. You've certainly had a miraculous life, and it's been an honor talking to you today. Thank you so much for your time, Chris. And if you want to give one last plug there for your book that's coming out, remind people when it's coming out and where they can get it.
Yep, the Harold's Heavenly Christmas comes out December the 1st. I don't think it'll be in bookstores over in Ireland and the UK.
They can get it on Amazon though.
They can get it on Amazon, and if you like Christmas, you'll love it. It's a great. You see my hat; it says SCFD. That stands for Seminole County Fire Department. I'm a volunteer chaplain for the fire department, and so I wrote the book is actually about a firefighter who dies and goes to heaven, and God uses him. It's fantasy, it's not biblical, but it's just fantasy. It's a feel-good story, and but I think once you pick it up, you won't be able to put it down. It's a great book. Let me ask you, Jonathan, how old are you?
31. 31.
Are you married?
No, I'm a single man.
Single guy, and you're obviously a believer, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I just want to say thank you for friending me on Facebook. Thank you for contacting me and wanting me to do this. And I hope you have a lot of good success with it, and God bless you. And I want to pray for you before I hang up. Okay?
Yeah, sure thing. Thank you.
Oh, Lord, thank you for the great opportunity that you have given me to talk with Jonathan, and to talk with all of those people who will view this video. And I do pray out of anything that can come out of this interview, I think the greatest thing that can come out of it is someone having a life change and coming to know Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior of their life. And so I just pray that you'll use that. And I pray, Lord, that everybody that listens would be encouraged and strengthened. And I pray for Jonathan that you'll use him greatly in what you have him do. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
God bless you, buddy.
God bless you too, Chris. Thank you so much for doing this. It's been absolutely fantastic.